Welcome into another Key of David podcast. And there is no Trevor Keys today. He was unable to make it. And when you're doing 100 videos, 100 long form videos in 100 days, it's hard to get everybody's schedule coordinated. But I am joined by David the Lion Douglas, thank goodness. And we have an awesome guest for you. I was so excited that he agreed to come onto our show. His name is Stephen Pynakker.
Mm-hmm.
Say it, Stephen. So I say it right.
Pynakker. Yep.
Pynakker. And many of you have probably seen his videos. He does Mormon book reviews and has had all sorts of people on. And I'm excited to have Stephen on because I'm excited to learn his story. I watch him interview all of these other people and I'm like, but I want to know more about who Stephen is and why is this guy doing all this and what's his story and how did he get started? So that's what we're going to get into today. But Stephen, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on today. I really am excited to be able to be part of your program today.
Well, it's cool because normally you're the one interviewing other people, and now we're flipping the script a little bit, and I get the opportunity, and David and I, to interview you. So before we jump into the Mormon book reviews and all of that, give me a little history about who is Stephen Pynakker. How did you grow up? Like, what is your religious affiliation before we get into all the Mormon stuff?
Okay, so I was raised just outside the city of Chicago in this Northwest Indiana area, and which includes, I tell people, that part of the country is as Catholic as Boston and as evangelical as Tulsa. So it's a nice mix mesh of religious identities and groups. You name whatever religious sect you want to think of, it's there in the Chicagoland, Northwest Indiana area. So my parents were raised in the Christian Reformed Church, which is a Dutch Calvinist denomination. It's actually highly, highly influential because most of the Christian book publishers are based in Western Michigan, and that was almost all Dutch run. So from Zondervan to Baker Books to Eardsman's to, you name the publisher, almost all the Christian publishers were based out of the Christian Reformed Church, as are often referred to as the Jews of evangelicalism, because we're a tiny little group. We have this huge, tremendous impact on the broader evangelical world, including helping start the New International Version translation of the Bible. But then my parents in the 1960s got involved in the charismatic renewal movement, which is very similar to the Restoration in that they believe that there's gifts for today, that we believe in prophecy, we believe in modern prophets, we believe in speaking in tongues, we believe in all these kind of things. So there's some similar parallels to the Restoration and the charismatic renewal movement, which took off in the 60s and 70s and now is the single largest segment of Christianity. There are over 500 million charismatics and Pentecostals in the world, and by 2050 we will be larger than Islam. So if people are looking for like a latter-day move of God that started in 1906, look at the charismatic Pentecostal movement, because it has all the earmarks of a latter-day movement. And so also what's interesting is that, and just to parallel it, the very same people that hated the charismatics and the Pentecostals are the same people that also hated the Mormons. And so in many ways we have
we're
similar,
on the same team.
Yes, same rivals and enemies. Now, of course, a lot of charismatics and Pentecostals think, of course, that Mormons are of the devil, that they, that all the God maker stuff that's out there that I grew up with. And just so you know, I'm a little kid and I'm growing up in Chicago, and they had the God makers on television on one of the largest Christian television stations in the country. They broadcasted. They had this big event, and they were running that God Makers cartoon. This is pre-internet. They're running the God Makers cartoon on a loop on the Christian television station. So, and then they had this big to-do. They had the God Makers, and then afterwards they actually had a live thing where they had, I guess, I don't know if they had a stake president or a bishop. They had a couple local LDS leaders and some evangelical leaders kind of have a debate afterwards. I've contacted the Chicago History Museum, television museum, because I want to get my hands on that tape. It's totally media. But I was just a little kid when I was first exposed to that was anti-Mormonism stuff. But to start the story, really, when I was an 8-year-old boy, we were staying at a Marriott hotel Marriott Hotel, and of course that's owned by a Mormon family. And there's a Book of Mormon in the hotel room. And I just remember encountering this and looking and like, what is this? Like, and my parents said, well, this is like the Bible of this other group. This is their scriptures. They're not really Christians. They just have their own thing. And so I was kind of exposed to Mormonism. But what really struck me and what really hit me was those Arnold Freiberg paintings
Mm.
in
Where
the
they're
Book of
all
Mormon.
buff and ripped and yes.
Exactly. You got, and, I just remember Samuel the Lamanite up on the
Yes.
wall. I
His
also
paintings
remember
are the best.
they're awesome. And then I remember seeing like Jesus, like the second coming of Jesus happening during Bible times when he's like, coming to the new world, but I didn't understand it. I thought this is interesting. It looks like the Bible. It has chapters and verses. It has these interesting paintings. And what's so fascinating to me, those paintings enthralled me. Well, last fall I had Richard Bushman on my program, and I told him that story. And he goes to me, he said, Steve, do
Wow.
you realize that Arnold Freiberg painted those paintings in the early 50s specifically for youth? He said, so apparently it to capture the imagination of the youth. And he said, it apparently caught, and I said, yeah, well, it certainly caught my imagination. So those were painted, intended for kids. It wasn't even intended to go into the Book of Mormon until years later. So that was really the beginning of my dance, if you will, with the restoration. And then, and I will share you this. So this particular Book of Mormon is the very first book in my collection, which I stole from a Marriott hotel when I was
Oh, boy.
I was in the Christian high school basketball
It's
tournament.
meant to be stolen, just so you know. It's meant to be
Well,
stolen.
I felt guilty for years, but I actually did an episode, and everybody forgave me for stealing it, and they said actually that's supposed to be. And so this was the very first. So 18-year-old me, this was the very first book in my collection, and just like Samuel the Lamanite. I mean, come on, and then
Dude,
right behind it, see these two.
That they need to put in those pictures. Like we need to put a petition in because I remember those Books of Mormon, and I remember thumbing through it and going right to the pictures. So, so tell me what that experience was like. You find this book. What made you decide to actually pick it up? And were you drawn to the pictures at first? I mean, talk to me a little bit about what that experience was like as you're kind of discovering this.
Well, I mean, I think as an 8-year-old boy, I get enthralled by the paintings. I think I felt like I was being a naughty Christian boy for stealing this. Like well, I'm doing people a favor by taking this so that somebody doesn't get exposed to the satanic religion or something like that. Maybe how I thought about it. So I want to tell you, my journey is an interesting one because I was exposed. I tell people I went the opposite direction most people go. Like people who leave the church, they start off with faithful stuff, then they start off with scholarly stuff, and then they start reading anti stuff, and maybe they leave the church. I started with anti, then I went to the scholarly stuff, and then I went to the faithful stuff. So I went the exact opposite direction than most people go. And what's so fascinating is I would say that I was actually I was the department head in the city of Hammond, Indiana, of the city sealer. So I was head of the Department of Weights and Measures, and I was in my early 20s, probably about 23, 24, and I'm this department head. And there was this conference in Portland, Oregon, Weights and Measures conference that I flew out to go to. And I remember Powell's bookstore, which is one of the largest bookstores in the world, was there. And I wasn't old enough to rent a car at the time. So a lot of my free time I would spend going to Powell's. And they had this huge Latter-day Saint section. And I just spent a lot of time parked in front of that, just going through the stuff. And I thought I knew Mormonism, but then I'm there and I'm standing next to this guy. We started having this conversation, and this turns out this guy was a recent convert to the Mormon, to Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I thought, okay, so here I am. And just to backtrack, so my parents got involved in the charismatic movement. I attended, but we were what you could call charismatic Calvinists. So I was still like a Calvinist in my worldview. I attended a charismatic Calvinist school in South Holland, Illinois, called Calvary Academy. And so there you had this whole Dutch community that kind of broke off from the Christian Reformed Church and kind of started their own charismatic Calvinist movement. So I'm still hardwired as a Calvinist, and Calvinists are notorious because we love to get into debates with people. People like Jeff Durbin and James White, these characters, which I'm not really a big fan of, to say the least, but because I tell people I've since moved on from being a Calvinist. I tell people I used to be a Calvinist, then I found Jesus. That's my joke. But I thought like a Calvinist, and I fought like a Calvinist as well. And so I'm having this conversation with this guy for 3 hours. And he's just a recent convert. And honestly, I thought I'd run circles around this guy, but in many ways, he ran circles around me. So that really taught me a lesson like, oh, you thought you knew, Steve. Well, now you got to make sure, like Paul says, we have to have a ready answer. The next time, you got to win that debate, Steve. So it was like a challenge to really study Mormonism and stuff like that. So as the journey continues, I'm like, but then I start reading books. And actually, interesting enough, read No Man Knows History. I read Rough Stone Rolling by Richard Bushman. And Richard Bushman's a good friend. I mean, I just love that guy. And
I
I'm
actually
starting,
really like Rough Stone Rolling. A lot of people don't. I thought it was really good. So
I think that Rough Stone Rolling was like, you read that book, and I found myself liking Joseph Smith, and
totally.
actually found that I feel like I have a special kinship with Joseph, in the sense that I really like, and then again, I've been on Mormon Stories, so I've told this story. And one of the stories I like to tell is how I believe that Joseph Smith and I, if we would have been contemporaries back in the day, we're both very similar people. I said we would have been maybe frenemies. We would have wrestled each other. We would have excommunicated each other from each other's church, but then he'd excommunicate me. But then the next Sunday, he'd forgive me and have me give the sermon. I said, that's the kind of relationship I think I would have with Joseph Smith. So I have this really unique bond with Joseph that's been there almost my entire life. I tell people, when I was a little kid, I thought, I feel like we need another Bible because the Bible that we have today doesn't seem to be working in today's society. And then I found out about this young boy who encountered scriptures, and that kind of was like a Bible 2.0 in many ways. So I really felt like I had a real kinship with Joseph Smith, and so that, and then you have to understand that as I'm deconstructing my own faith at this time. So I was in the evangelical, I was very much involved in the charismatic renewal movement, but I got really disenchanted with the church, and actually I suffered PTSD and religious and spiritual abuse in the church. So I actually cut ties with the evangelical world, and then circa, I don't know, probably around 2006 or so, I became an atheist. So I basically was an
Wow.
atheist, yeah, for like
Wow.
13 years. Actually, it was like atheist
Unexpected.
agnostic for like 13 years. And so this is what's so fascinating, is that my journey of faith. So now, well, let me just backtrack and say, okay, so I studied Mormonism at first as a evangelical Christian who wanted to evangelize Mormons. Then I deconstruct, so I study Mormonism to kind of deconstruct religion, all religion. And then, but the thing is that as I suffered extraordinarily horrible depression, lifelong depression, but it was really, 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 really bad. I basically had like a nervous breakdown, 2010 or so, I don't know. And I was in really bad shape. So, and people who often commit suicide, part of the reason they do is because they lose interest in everything. Eventually they lose interest in life. Well, there was something about Mormonism in particular that kept me pursuing it. And I tell people, like I say, my last episode I did on Mormon Stories was how Mormonism saved an evangelical's life. That's where it came in.
Did they like that? Did they like that? That's what you were talking about? Were they cool with that?
Well, John Dehlin loves my story. He loves, I'm very, you understand, like, I've had people go after me, say, how could you be friends with John Dehlin? And I'm like, well, don't you think maybe God's plan is to have a believer in John's life? And I believe that's my appointment. That's my assignment.
Wow.
You're the perfect person to do that because you're the least threatening of anybody out there. And so it makes perfect
honestly,
sense.
I will tell you, I am very close friends with John. Like John and I are very, very close. He doesn't have a whole lot of close friends because of the guy. I remember the first time I ever had lunch with the guy, and it was almost like I was having lunch with a movie star. Like people would come up and they'll be like, "Oh, I'm so sorry to interrupt. I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you." And then the people at the booth behind us are like, "Oh, can we get a selfie?" And I'm sitting there like, "Oh my gosh, John Dehlin is either Korihor in Utah, or he is a demigod put up on a pedestal in the ex-Mormon community." I thought, what this guy needs is a friend.
Yeah.
So to me, I feel like that's God.
Good for
God
you.
called me to be John Dehlin's friend.
Good for you.
Okay.
That's
Well,
exactly what the Savior would do.
So
if there's anything I could say that's positive about John, in that one thing I can say is that he's definitely, the impression I get is that he's a big advocate for those that have dealt with depression. And he wants them to be able to rise up about that. And out of the videos I have seen, his Jubilee episode, where he talks to, Cardin at Ward Radio, and, I didn't like how that turned out in the episode of Jubilee, but you could see right away that John was definitely like speaking up about those that have dealt with depression. And
Yeah.
so,
And I think my story resonated with John a lot because he felt like honestly, he wants to help people that have suffered spiritual and religious abuse and PTSD. And it happens. And I don't care what group you're talking about. I'm not going to go and say it just happens, folks. I mean, look, faithful Latter-day Saints, you've had bad experiences with maybe a bishop or a stake president or, something. This is, and sometimes it really gets really devastating. And sometimes people almost have to be, I tell people I'm a pro-atheist evangelical because sometimes people have suffered such religious trauma and spiritual trauma, they almost have to become atheists because even the concept of God triggers them. Right. So I think that there can be a therapeutic value to atheism. That's why I don't hate on atheists. Okay. But I go on Mormon stories and I just talk about how Mormonism saved my life. And like I said, John was very respectful of my story and loved it actually. And considered it to be one of his most important interviews he's ever done. And so I think what it was is you could argue this naturalistically because I still think like an atheist in many ways. Maybe it was my brain subconsciously or my mind subconsciously saying, okay, throw yourself into Mormonism because it's the only thing that's going to keep you alive. Or maybe it was divine intervention by God. In either way, I feel that you could argue both tracks. Maybe both are true, that Mormonism saved my life. So what does this look like? Well, it means I go online, I read as many papers as I can. I check out as many books out of the library as I can. I have my own book collection. And some of these books I've read, like I think I read Rough Stone Rolling at least 3 times. Because sometimes I would just like run out of stuff to read and just go back and reread everything. So imagine in June of 2021, I have 106 subscribers. And Rick Bennett of Gospel Tangents talked me into going to the Mormon History Association. And I was just like, man, my channel was just a couple months old. Nobody knew who I was. And I was just like, all right, well, I'm going to find out what my blind spots are now. And because I didn't know how much I knew because I didn't have anybody to talk to. I had this information stored in my brain, but I didn't have anybody to talk to. I mean, like I could make a really good joke that would make a Latter-day Saint laugh. And I could tell the same joke to an evangelical, but I had to spend about 30 minutes explaining to them why the joke is funny. And of course, that was the thing. So here,
he's a preface.
Mormon History Association's Thursday night, and they're doing the panel discussion about Murder Among the Mormons, which just had debuted on Netflix, and they had the whole panel discussion there. And before the presentation begins, I see Richard and Claudia Bushman. And I remember Richard, I introduced myself to him, and I told him who I am. I'm an evangelical Christian who's really interested in Mormon history, and I would be honored if he would come on my program. And he immediately agreed to doing it. And if you don't mind, I should, let me just see if I can grab something really quick so we can edit this out or, whatever.
You're good. Hey, this is really cool. It's so cool for me to be able to interview somebody. I mean, look at all the books. Look at all the study he's done. Here's an evangelical that, I mean, he's not even Mormon, but he may know Mormonism better than most Mormons. And it's cool that we get to have him on and have this discussion.
Well, okay. Look at his shirt. Look, do you see his shirt? Look at this brilliant shirt.
Oh, that's cool.
This was sent to me an early birthday present from one of my viewers. I mean, I get people send me gifts. They're often Latter-day Saints, but this was the clincher. So I just had these business cards made. And I've since rebranded, but I essentially took a picture of my bookshelf, okay? And I'm as I'm talking to Richard, Claudia is looking at the card, and she says, Richard, look, he's got 2 of your books on his bookshelf. Yeah. And I think that's what clinched it right then and there. So because
cool. You had like 100 subscribers or something like this, and you asked Richard Bushman to come on, and he's like, done.
And Rick Bennett of Gospel Tangents goes to me and says, I've been asking Richard to come on my show for years. He keeps turning me down.
We should have him on too. Actually,
yeah, Rick's
that's
a good
cool.
guy. Yeah, Rick was the very first interview I ever did. And that was so you understand the landscape a few years ago was much different than it is now. So essentially, in addition to studying, I was watching Mormon stories every night, and I was watching Gospel Tangents every night, because those are like my two go-to channels. That was about it. And then you had a little bit of Radio Free Mormon. You had a few other places, but honestly, a few years ago, the landscape was much different. And actually, I feel like I was kind of a trailblazer.
Totally.
Because I showed that I could be somebody who doesn't know a single Latter-day Saint, lives in a 50-year-old mobile home with his mom, all right, and is then able to schedule like the who's who of all the big names of Mormonism almost immediately.
True.
So I feel like it gave people inspiration, like, well, if he can do it, and next thing you know, over the course of the last 3 years, what's happened? It's just exploded. But a lot of these people, I helped launch their YouTube channels and their podcasts, and many of the people that are even bigger than me now, like Jeff McCullough of Hello Saints, he was on my channel when he had 700 subscribers. I was bigger than him at the time. I was the one that helped give the world David Boyce of 52 Churches in 52 Weeks, but nobody knew who he was.
Oh, cool.
So you have to understand, like I was on the cutting edge of everything, of all the big news stories, all the big people that are going to be that nobody had ever heard of.
You know,
I was on they got on my radar screen way before anybody else did. So I helped launch many podcasts, and many of them are even bigger than me now. But and then Rebecca Biblioteca, of Mormonish, she was a guest host, and she's been my co-host many times, and then she's become quite successful. So yeah, this is my YouTube channel, Mormon Book Reviews, and like I said, we talk to everybody.
Holy cow, you've done 569 videos.
Yep.
Okay, first I gotta say, I've been wanting to talk to Scott Walter forever. So when I saw you got Scott Walter on your channel, that blew my mind. And then my favorite episode is when you interviewed the Jewish kid that he wrote a book, but he I didn't know you guys had these guys too. I love these guys.
I helped launch them. Yeah.
But the Jewish guy
I had Dan McClellan on, one of the top biblical scholars in the world, to talk about those golden plates that were most likely a forgery. If you go to Jason Olson of the Burning Book, he's the Jewish convert, right? So if you go to
that one was awesome.
Yeah, just go to the top and hit. Just go to the top and hit popular. It'll pop right up. Go to popular. Yep. So here we have Jason Olson. That was my most viewed video, 41,000 views, and that was explosive, really life changing. And then if you scroll over to the next one, Daybell's neighbor, she will only come on my program. She's one of my hugest fans, and so in the true crime community, I'm very well known. But not only that, we have had some of the biggest atheists in the world come on my program. I'm talking to Derek Lambert of Myth Vision podcast. There's my thing on the Joseph Smith photograph, which has become the episode that everybody goes to. You got the episode with Greg Manson and Jacob Hansen, which was explosive and really caused a lot of conversations. So yeah, we've been in the middle of breaking some of the biggest news stories there are. But this is the thing. This is the key difference is I'm the only, neutral Mormon podcaster.
So what do you describe, just so our listeners kind of understand what that means and why that makes you so unique, and probably why so many people are willing to come on your channel, because they know that you're in this position of neutrality.
Yeah, I just feel like what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to model. So I also have a second channel called the Utah Interfaith Forum. And that was actually started by a Facebook group last year. A Faithful Latter-day Saints started this Facebook group, built it up, and then he handed it to me and said, I merely modeled what you are doing, and we used the principles that you are doing and applied it to our group. And so now we have this fantastic, wonderful forum on Facebook called the Utah Interfaith Forum, which now has spawned into a YouTube channel, which we planned on reaching in April, but unfortunately I had some medical condition hit me. So we're just getting that launched, and I've done about 8 or 10 interviews, and even David Boyce came on and helped me launch some stuff on there. And so we just getting started with our new channel, Utah Interfaith Forum channel. I'm at 8,600 subscribers on my main channel. I'd love to get to 10,000 soon, and I'd love to get Utah
Let's
Interfaith
help him out. Listen, if you don't follow him, if you don't subscribe, and you're watching this on Zion Media, jump over to his channel. Let's get him to 10,000. That would be awesome.
I'd love to get Utah Interfaith Forum to 1,000. So let's do it, because I really
Let's
feel like
go.
these two channels are doing an important work. And so this is the things, like, why can't more people do this? Now you have to understand, like, what I'm trying to model is not just within interreligious dialogue. Look, the day the war started in Israel, I have one of the top Hebrew scholars in the world whose apartment he had to evacuate into a shelter earlier that day. I go on his program, Dr. Nehemiah Gordon, one of the top Hebrew scholars in the world, who was my co-host with Scott Walter. And I'm interviewing him on his channel, while the bombs are being exploded in Jerusalem. And so then I did a series of interviews where I had some of the top, like, military people, like Jason Olson. He serves in the Navy doing intelligence. I'm almost getting like de facto intelligence briefings about what's happening in Israel in real time. And I'm talking to rabbis in Israel. I'm talking to Christians who do work. And so my whole thing was, look, and then I have a Muslim reach out to me in the Utah Interfaith Forum, and I tell his story on my channel as well. Okay, so I'm trying to show, like, not only can we apply these principles to this world of evangelicals and restorationists, but at war with each other for 200 years, right? And I'm like, after 200 years of doing this, I really feel like God appointed me in one sense, and I don't want to sound like I'm messianic or anything like that, or I'm like some prophet, but I do believe that God appointed me, I don't think coincidentally, right around the time where all the 200-year anniversary marks are happening, right? And I do feel like my role is to come from the enemy camp with a olive branch saying, let's talk. But I also think that we can apply the very same principles that what we're doing in this world to the political sphere and other spheres as well. Because I don't understand why we can't be civil. And God showed me early on, like, okay, so when I first started this channel, God showed me, he said he had me placed on one side of the road with a crew of people holding signs, our side, right? And then across the street was the other side, them holding their signs in opposition to us. And God went to me and he said, just remember, those people across the street, Steve, are fellow image bearers. Never forget that they are fellow image bearers. So when I'm dealing with somebody that I maybe don't agree with and maybe I don't even like, I just have this mantra in my head: fellow image bearer, fellow image bearer.
What do you mean by that? Meaning they're in the image of God? What does that mean to you? That's what
we are all created in God's image.
Totally.
And we need to honor the divinity of everyone who's been created in the image of God.
Amen.
We all bear his image. And unless we forget that, then we have this country that's in the state that it's in, because we have demonized the other. And it doesn't matter. A pox on all parties here. We've all done it.
Yes.
All right. I think that we have to remind ourselves, like, the basic humanity, that we are all image bearers. Remember that. We tend to forget that.
I love that. I had somebody reach out to me and they said, Shane, I'm trying to seek the face of the Lord. And I said, listen, if that's what you're trying to do, and good on you for doing it, seek the face of the Lord in everybody you encounter. And once you see his face in everybody you encounter, then will you be ready to see his face? Because I think we see his face in every single individual that we encounter. And we forget that. So thank you for bringing that up.
We all look through a glass darkly, and we need to take the blinders off, and we need to quit being told that that's a bad person because somebody on Fox News or MSNBC says that it's a bad person. You've got to embrace them where they're at. So I can have friends. Look, I've had many LGBTQ people on my channel. I've had many progressives. I've had many atheists. I've had Lutherans, some of the top Lutheran theologians, Pentecostals, Baptists, Catholics. Every voice within the Restoration has been on my program. Okay, almost every sect or manifestation or expression of the Restoration is on my program. Like, I don't discriminate, and I think it's really important just to turn on the microphone and let the person tell their story, and don't have an agenda. And I've had some pretty, there's some very well-known Latter-day Saints that I've been in touch with. There's an apostle that I know has watched my program. I can tell you, I'll just say that right up front. Okay, so it goes all the way up to the Quorum of the 12. And so I'm having this interesting effect. And honestly, I honestly don't think that, like another scholar went to me and he says, if you were a character in a fictional book, you would not be a believable character. because I'm such a unicorn.
Yeah,
I
you are a
shouldn't.
unicorn for sure.
So that's kind of how I operate. And so I do believe that it's God's hand, and then last February here, just to give you context, okay, not this past February, last year, February, I arrived on February 7th, the day that they announced the temple changes, right? And then next thing you know, I'm in John Dehlin's studio interviewing him for my channel. Okay. And I'm just like, and then 3 days later, guess where I'm at? On Monday, I'm in Provo, Utah at the More Good Foundation studio.
Wow.
Where Saints Unscripted is being
Wow.
filmed. The church knows that I'm friends with John Dehlin. And we all know that you don't go on Saints Unscripted unless it's okayed, right? So that to me is the remarkable thing, that they know that I can be friends with Korihor, but yet I can go on a faithful Latter-day Saint program geared towards Latter-day Saint youth and essentially get the stamp of approval that I'm kosher to LDS youth.
So in all of this reading that you've done, I've watched enough of your videos that I kind of know this. I don't know that our listeners know this, but where are you with the Book of Mormon and the Restoration and Joseph Smith? What are your thoughts and all the research and studying and conversations you've had? Do you have a conclusion? Have you come to a conclusion?
Not necessarily. So I tell people, I said, so you gotta understand, I was an atheist materialist for a very long time. So I still think like an atheist. So I can go on Mormon stories and do a 3-hour How the Book of Mormon was created episode, all off the top of my head with no notes, no preparation, and give a naturalistic explanation as to how the Book of Mormon came to be. In other words, there's no God, there's no angels, there's no supernatural. So how can we take into account the Book of Mormon? I tell people I did a 3-hour thing on the Book of Mormon. I could do a 6-hour thing on the Bible. Same process, right? Because I deconstructed my own faith and I deconstructed religion in general, right? So I'm just coming up with a naturalistic explanation. But then I can then say, but if you are a believer and you believe in the supernatural, you believe in God, you believe in angels, then this book represents a challenge to people who want to reject it. So they'll attack this book, but yet they'll go after it, but yet they won't take the same process to their own scripture. So they'll talk about anachronisms in the Book of Mormon, but they'll ignore the anachronisms in the Bible. That's the issue I have. So I look at it this way. I can look through the Book of Mormon, Joseph Smith, and the Restoration through a materialistic lens, and I can look through it with a supernaturalistic lens. And I think both approaches are helpful. So I tell people, so Josh Gailey, who's an evangelist with the Church of Jesus Christ, my favorite, your Pentecostal Book of Mormon believing cousins, they're just an awesome church. If I ever get to a Church of Jesus Christ church, you got to get to it because they're awesome. And I had dinner with him a couple of years, and his father's the president of the church. And as a matter of fact, I'll just share this with you because this is one of my most awesome things.
Where are they headquartered? Are they in Missouri?
No, they're in Monongahela, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And so I got this, and they have this red letter edition of the Book of Mormon, which is fantastic. It has all the words of Christ. This third Nephi, it's all red, of course. They have a great red letter edition. But earlier this year, they had a conference not too far from where I live, and I had 11 of the 12 apostles of their church sign their name and give me their favorite Book of Mormon.
I was going to ask you about that.
That's cool.
I was going to ask if you had run that conference or was that just something you attended, because I saw the video where you were talking about the Book of Mormon. You were talking about, I was really impressed with you when I saw you talking about the Book of Mormon the way you were at that conference. I just thought it was...
And that was actually a Book of Mormon rally that I was supposed to speak at in Independence, Missouri earlier this year, but I had to cancel. But yeah, I love talking to all the different branches of the Restoration. And actually, one of my messages that I wanted to give at Firm Foundation, I did give at last year's Book of Mormon rally, and it's something I've been working on, is that one of my favorite verses is talking about there were no more matter of ites, right? And that led to a 200, what I call a 200-year proto-millennium in the Book of Mormon, right?
Stephen, I just got chills when you said that, because the desire of my heart is to experience that, and to have all of us that believe in Joseph Smith and believe in the Book of Mormon set aside these differences, which are honestly, it's like it's we can set those aside, and there
Yes.
can be no manner of ites among us. And if we can achieve that, it would just like
And so
my soul would leap for joy.
that's when I was speaking at this rally, I went and I said, the Book of Mormon tells us that there are no manner of ites, but I see in this room, I see Josephites and Binghamites. I see Bickertonites and Cutlerites. I just went through all that matter of ites. I said, it's time for the restoration. If the restoration, in one sense, if it does have an end time calling, right?
And
if it does, right, then there should be no matter of ites in the restoration.
Oh,
I think that's important.
Amen.
Amen.
And I feel like
Absolutely.
that's the work you're doing with your channel. I feel like that's what you're bringing together. I feel like that's probably what you've been called to do. And there's nobody better, given your background, to be able to put this together. So I appreciate the work that you're doing. So to go back a little bit, talk to me a little bit about how your channel kind of has grown, and talk to us a little bit about some of your favorite interviews that you've had along the way. I'm sure you've had so many of them, but are there any that stand out to you that you would say to people, hey, go check this video out?
I would say that one of the most important interviews I did early on, the book Richard Bushman, of course, that was a big deal. I mean, when I taped my interview with Richard Bushman, guess who I'm on the phone with the next day? I'm on my first phone call with John Dehlin. I was like, who are you and how in the world did you get Richard Bushman to come on, right? So that was a big deal. But I had, I've had John Hamer on with the Community of Christ. We did some great stuff. But I think that one of my most important interviews was with Don Bradley. And what was so cool is I was talking to Don Bradley before I even met Richard Bushman. And Don Bradley heard, he's an evangelical Christian. And he goes to me, he says, and so we actually, it's September of 2021, I still only had like 300 subscribers. I go to Don Bradley's apartment. We sit on his couch. We do a 2-part interview. The first one was about the book, the last 116 pages. And then the second one was from atheist back to Mormonism. It was he said, I want to come on your program, Steve, because I had a similar journey. You were an atheist and now you're an evangelical. He says, I was an atheist. And then I kind of became like Eastern religion for a while. Then he became a born again Christian, evangelical. And then he went back into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The very first time he ever told his story was on my channel to this unknown guy, and had the privilege to sit with one of my favorite books of all time is the Lost 116 Pages book. And I'm sitting on freaking Don Bradley's couch interviewing him about this really interesting story that he had to tell. Interesting book,
it's a brilliant
fantastic
story.
book, but a wonderful man. I was just talking to him on the phone the other day. I mean, him and I are just close buds. We're tight. And so we had this really strong kinship. So I think that was like a really important interview that I did. Now, I've done hundreds and hundreds of interviews with the you name them. They've either been on my program or they're going to be coming on my program. I've had or been in touch with them. And I literally have a waiting list of people that just goes so back, and it's even piled up more so since I had to put the channel on hiatus for a couple months. But even early on, like I had Mark Staker from the church history department come on my program in the summer of 2021. Again, this was just the early days. And he promised me he would come on my program to reveal the pollen study of what they were growing at Tundridge Farm in 1790s Vermont when Joseph Smith was farming the land. So they were able to excavate these pollen spores, and they ran them through some kind of like collider thingy. So then he came on my program to announce the results on my channel before anybody else, before Deseret News, before anybody else. He came on my channel.
Cool.
That set that. We're just talking about pollen, but yeah. And then it turns out they were growing hops, which is to make beer, and that was what they were growing at the time. And so I early on, like, this was an important story of the restoration. And then over the course of the last few years, I've broken all these stories. Some of it was done through sleuthing. Some of it was just through just something would land right on my lap.
I love it.
And next thing you know, last March, I literally broke like the biggest news story in the history of the restoration.
I want to hear the backstory to last March 5th, church acquired. I mean, I think the church did not want to announce it. I think their plan was to announce it at that conference, try to keep everything under wraps.
I think they were planning on announcing it at General Conference. When they announced all the new temples, they were going to announce the Kirtland Temple cell. Yes, I agree.
So tell
you
me how
ruined
you
it. I
built
love
that
it.
story. Walk me through how that worked.
Well, what was so fascinating? So I was actually had already scheduled at 2:30. So it's at 2:30. So I'll give you the breakdown. At 2:30, I had scheduled to do an interview with for my Utah Interfaith Forum channel with Monica, who's my co-host for that channel. And we're going to interview a lady who's an evangelical who operates a thrift store in Provo. Okay. 10 minutes before I'm supposed to tape this interview, I get a call from John Hychek, who is he's a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, capital D, no hyphen. He's what is often referred to as a strayingite. Okay, and John Hychek and I have been friends almost since the beginning, and he goes to me and he says, "I want to come on your program." Now I've been asking John to come on my program for years, and he never wanted to come on. So he says, "I want to come on your program now. I want to tape something with you now." I'm like, "What are you talking about, John?" He says, "Do you want to break one of the biggest stories ever?" And I'm like, "What is it?" He says, "The Kirtland Temple is going to be sold." And I'm like, holy smokes. Now you have to understand the backstory is I cultivate relationships with all these other people from all the different groups. And people mainly, I've had a bishop from your church say, "Why do you talk to all these small groups? You know, we make up 98% of the restoration. You should focus all your attention on this." Well, this is the reason why I talk to all the small groups, because they all have these little, I call them pearls of the restoration.
Totally.
And so I developed a good friendship with John. Well, John calls me and he says, "Can we tape something right now?" Because they're about ready to announce the sale. It's coming down. I'm like, "Really?" I said, "Okay." Well, my people are like, in journalism, you need to have all these things. And my gut told me, no, I think this guy, he's reaching out to me for a reason. This is going to happen. So I get on the Zoom call with my guests and say, "Listen, give me some time here, because I'm just about ready to break one of the biggest news stories ever. They're going to sell the temple." And they're like gobsmacked, of course, because they get to hear it for the first time. So we're like, okay, so we'll push off the interview a little bit. At 2:45, I tape my interview with John, where he's live at in Independence, Missouri, outside, announcing it, and I tape it. I contact my producer, who's working at the time, and I said, "Can you make me a thumbnail like in the next 5 minutes, because I'm about to break the biggest news story ever." So we taped for 15 minutes at 3 o'clock. At 3:05, I get the thumbnail from my producer, and at 3:15, I release the video. And guess what I do at 3:15? I'm taping my interview with Monica about the thrift store owner in Provo, Utah, while my phone is exploding. So for the first half hour of this huge, I'm just seeing the numbers exploding. I'm just getting tons and tons of views, because so for the first few hours of this story, I was the only one that had the story. Well, then John goes on Michelle Brady Stone's channel. Then he goes on Word Radio, but this was all after the announcement was made. Now, I think what happened,
I found you because of that story. So I got wind of it, and that's where I found you. I didn't know who John Hychek was. I was just like, for me personally, that's a big deal. I've been waiting for the church to acquire that. And that's when I first found you. And so I was like,
hey,
this guy, what is going on?
I'm just going to say, Shane, I knew him before that. And it was actually after, you were open enough to talking right after your interview with that the black guy, is Latter-day Saint. Forget what his name is. You and your co-host, or the lady that you were on with, you both interviewed him. Do you recall his name? Who I'm talking about? I've only seen one other black guy on your show, so shouldn't be hard to figure. Yeah, I'm talking to you.
I've talked. Well, let's see. I had James Jones on, right? Is that the
it was Jones? Yeah.
Yep.
After I saw his episode with you, then I reached out and I wanted you to know that, because I that was the first time I really saw your channel, and I wanted you to know that there are some positive Latter-day Saint, Black Latter-day Saint, experiences, and I've had
I've had Tarek on. He's black. He's been on my show. Is it Tarek LaCour? Is that his name? I forget.
You can count them all on one, one hand.
Yeah. I've probably
Hey,
talked to. I've talked to one of the.
you
I've
need to
actually
have
been in touch with
you
one
need
of
to
the
have
brothers
Alex
in the.
Boyer
Oh
on.
yeah,
You need to have Alex Boyer on. Do you know Alex Boyer?
yeah. I've been and then actually I've had the congressman Burgess Owens
Oh,
on.
Burgess
Burgess.
Owens.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's cool.
And then I've had his daughter, Summer Rain, is a frequent co-host of mine. So I've had, I've probably talked to a majority of the African American saints. I'm just joking.
Yeah, it's pretty much all of them.
Amazing. Okay, so you break that story, and then talk to me a little bit about where you kind of see your as we kind of wrap up here. Where do you see your channel going? What do you want to have happen? What are some of the cool things that are happening? And where do you think this all goes for you?
It's so fascinating because early on, when I started this whole channel, God gave me some principles. And one of the principles he told me, he says, don't make any plans. Now, I'm a type A, maybe alpha male-ish kind of guy, likes to be in control. And God told me, don't make any plans. And so, like, I'm not sure what episode I'm releasing tomorrow. Don't know. I don't know what episode I'm releasing. I do 3 episodes a week. I have no idea what I'm releasing this week. Don't know. But God has told me not to make plans.
Love it.
And so I don't, and God even told me, and look, I know this may be just for a season. And then God may shut the door and say, okay, it's time to move on. I don't want that to happen, but I also.
Are you enjoying this?
Am I enjoying this?
Yeah, the channel, like, is it?
Oh, it's awesome. I pinch myself thinking, is this all a dream? Or am I dead and did I die and go to heaven or something? Because to me, it's like, I get to talk to all the people that I got to read, and then I get to meet all these people. And, and I want to get back to, because I actually want to talk a little bit about my adventure in the Mormon, when I did my first trip to Utah for the Mormon History Association. I'd said this earlier, that I thought, okay, well, I'm going to find out what my blind spots are now, because I don't know what I don't know. And so I go there, and it was the first, when I had the realization, was when I started telling BYU professors the history of their church that they hadn't heard of. I realized I didn't have the blinders on. Many of the people there did. Now, that's not to disparage them, because a lot of people in the academic world, they have they have their, their narrow category that they're studying. And I don't claim to know more about Mormonism than anybody else or anything like that. But I would say that I think I have the broadest view of the restoration, because I'm able to talk to all the different groups. So even like when I had Richard Bushman on last time and told him about Matthew Gill in the Book of Jeranek, of the alleged records of the people that built Stonehenge, the scriptures that he produced. And Richard Bushman goes to me and he says, I wish I would have consulted you for my book. To me, that's like the highest praise one could ever get. So that's just kind of cool just to have that experience. But so when you ask, do I have plans? I think, well, God has shown me glimpses. And he's even said, you can think about things, but it's going to even be bigger or much more different than you even anticipated. So I get glimpses. I do feel like I do in some ways operate in a prophetic realm. I don't claim to be a prophet. And I do feel like I have this calling. And I've heard from many people, what's interesting, and I don't want to, I think I have to be really careful, but I do feel like there are many, I've heard this from many people from different aspects of the restoration, not just from the Utah branch, but from many of them. And I've heard this, and it's so fascinating. And I want to actually hear what you guys think about this. And this was early on. People caught the vision early on. And I've heard this from all different groups. And they said, I believe that you're going to play a role to help usher in Zion. And I'm like, I don't know what that means, because I'm coming from a completely different world, the evangelical world. But what does that mean? Well, maybe we use different terminologies from our different particular traditions, right? But I think people do feel like I'm playing some kind of role. And I don't think it's coincidental, like I said earlier, that this is a 200-year anniversary. Like almost every year, almost every month is like a 200-year anniversary of something important within the restoration. So I don't think it's insignificant. So I don't claim to be anything other than just some single dude who lives with his mom in a 50-year-old mobile home in Florida, drives a 16-year-old car now, has 2 pairs of blue jeans, buys most of his T-shirts from Goodwill, and occasionally has a fan send a shirt in, which is really cool. I don't have material wealth of any kind. I live a very simple existence, and on paper, I'm a loser, right? Because I'm a single guy who lives with his mom. But honestly, I just feel blessed. It's really a blessing and a privilege. And I'll go back to what I was saying earlier. Well, I remember having a conversation with David Boyce of 52 Churches, and this is before he converted to your church. And one of the conversations I had with him is the privilege that we have is because we're not haters. Unlike all the evangelical haters who criticize the church, guess what? We get to see, David. We get to see the pearls of the restoration, which they won't share with the haters. And when you see the pearls of the restoration, you can't unsee.
Yeah. I can tell you this, Stephen, as you were talking, I had this scripture just bounce into my brain. And as I think about the important role that I believe you do play because of where you've been, because of your journey, because you've been in the evangelical realm to the atheist, and you understand Mormonism like very few people do. This is the scripture that came to my mind. I think it's Alma 37:6, and it says, "Now you may suppose that this is foolishness in me, but behold, I say unto you, it is by small and simple things that great things are brought to pass. And small means in many instances doth confound the wise." And I think when we talk about this marvelous work and a wonder, I think it's going to happen because of people like you. I think it's the small and simple things that make it happen. And if we think it's going to happen in this way, you should say, what's the opposite? And that's probably how God's going to do it.
I agree.
Because
I
that's
think
how he's always
the
done
model.
it.
Jesus wasn't the Messiah that they were anticipating, right? He didn't check off all the boxes in their preconceived mind of what it was supposed to look like. I think I think we can look at the second coming through the same way.
Yeah, and I think the work that you're doing in creating Zion, it starts by having us all love one another. It starts by having no poor among us. It starts by us being unified. And I think that's what your channel is doing. I think that's why you're bringing these people on. And I think we're going to see a restoration of the restoration. And it, to me, we live in such a unique time. We named our channel Zion Media because I'm like, let's start creating Zion. Well, what does that look like? Well, let's start having the discussion of what that looks like. It starts by us not fighting with each other, because I don't think in Zion they're fighting with one another. Let's find what we do have in common and let's build on what we have in common. And I think that's why I love your channel so much, because I think that's what you're doing. And you're not picking a side. You're saying we're all on the same side. You're saying, I see you, I see the image like you talked about. And when we can all do that, that's when we can start creating Zion. And so that's why I love what you're doing, man.
Thank you.
And I think you play a significant role. And it is by the small things. It is by, I'm not saying that you're weak, but it's not by the people that have the fancy cars and the nice house and that have this status. That's not how the Lord is going to work.
I just want to make it clear too that, I am a Protestant evangelical Christian who is a creedal Christian, believes in Nicene Christianity. I want to lay that out. But I also, and I will defend our positions, but not in a nasty way. I just think that, and one of the favorite, and again, I'm going to bring his name up, but one of the favorite things that John Dehlin ever said to me is we all need epistemological humility. And I think that's really important.
What does that mean? I don't even know that. Explain to me what that means.
So epistemology is like the search for truth and getting down to it. But then I think what we have is that people who think they've found okay, we got it. We're all right. You're then get arrogant. And I think we need to be humble in our approach. So yeah, do I know a lot? Yeah, I do. But can I still learn more? Yeah. I think it's the people who close themselves off. Look, that's why I love Richard Bushman, because you know what? He's still a student to this day. He still wants to learn in his 90s. Whereas I run into some of these apologists, whether they're evangelical apologists or Latter-day Saint apologists, who've already got their minds made up. And now they just want to do bad.
I've got a book for you to review. It's one of my favorite books. I have it right here. It's called In Tune with the Infinite by Ralph Waldo Trine. Okay. Have you ever heard of this book, Stephen?
I can't say that off the top of my head that I'm familiar with it. Nope.
Okay, I found it in prison of all places. I had never heard of it. I tell people it's the greatest book that nobody knows about. It was written in 1898 by a guy named Ralph Waldo Trine. It was hugely popular. Henry Ford used to give it away to anybody that would come into his office, and it's fallen into oblivion. But one of the things it talks about, that in order to gain more wisdom, you have to divest yourself from all intellectual pride.
Yeah.
And it's a really powerful book, but I'll send you a copy, because
Thank
that's
you.
what people do. I'm going to send you a copy. It's one of the deeper books that I've ever read. It's really powerful. It's what inspired the works of guys like Napoleon Hill. So this book
Okay.
inspired the Think and Grow Rich, that kind of a movement. So
Great.
anyway,
Well, I just want to say that I really enjoyed coming on your program today, and I want to extend an invitation for Zion Media to make an appearance on MBR. So let's get that set up down the road as well. Love to have you guys on.
I would love that, dude. That would be such an honor. And listen, our goal, we're going to get you to 10,000. So if you are watching this video right now, go click subscribe to MBR. I promise you it won't disappoint. It will open your mind. You'll learn more things. There's 569 videos that you can watch already. So go back and look at those videos. They're awesome. Stephen does such a great job with his guests and making them feel open and comfortable. And I think you do this, you have this unique ability to get people to open up to you. And that's such a unique skill. And it's awesome, because I see people share things on your channel and I watch them on other channels and they're not saying the same things. And so you have this unique ability to do that. That's one of the gifts that you have. And so keep doing that. We honor you and your path and you spreading the good word and unifying and bringing people together. So you can count on us coming on. You just tell us when, man, and we will be there 100%.
Great.
Awesome. So thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing. We're going to get you to 10,000. We're going to have a celebration when we do that. It's only 1,500 subscribers. I'm sure we get about 100 subs a day right now. It's kind of where we're landing, and we're trying to keep that momentum going. And I'm sure we got 1,500 people that aren't familiar with your channel that can go subscribe and get us there.
That's great.
So
that'd be fantastic.
Well, Stephen, thank you so much. David, do you have any final thoughts as we wrap up?
No, I love you, Stephen. Ever since getting to chat with you the first time, and as I was, at the time I was trying to figure you out, but as I've gotten to watch more of your shows, and just see your perspective and your positioning, I just have come to love you even more, and I love what you're doing. So thank you.
Appreciate it.
Stephen, thank you again for coming on. I've got some to-dos. I'm going to send you the book, In Tune with the Infinite. And we're going to get you to 10,000. We're going to try and move this episode to the top of the heap, because this has been one of my favorite episodes that we've done. So thank you so much for coming on. For myself, I'm Shane Baldwin. For David the Lion Douglas and Stephen Pynakker, thank you for joining us. Make sure you like and subscribe, share this video, and make sure you get over to Mormon Book Reviews and subscribe. Let's get them to 10,000.
In the heart of Zion, where the truth shines bright, we gather the stories, bring the shadows to light. From the ancient prophets to the visions anew, we're here to explore, to learn, to renew. Zion Media, where the journey begins, unlocking the mysteries, where the spirit wins. From the mountains of Mentina to the city of light, we're guiding the seekers through the darkest night. With the words of the prophets echoing in our soul, we dive into the scriptures, seeking to make us whole. From the plains of America to the temples on high, we uncover the secrets as the eagles fly by. Zion Media, where the journey